All right, let's start first off how you ended up in Milwaukee.
I ended up in Milwaukee the fall of 1993. I just finished playing out my option with Quebec Nordiques and really, was a free agent at the time and had been talking to Phil Whitliff, pretty much the entire summer, and it got to a point in August where I didn't have anything going back to the NHL, and I committed to Milwaukee, and that's where my IHL career started in Milwaukee.
There were I don't know if people remember, there were so fewer jobs. There was such a smaller amount. There was only 22, I suppose, with San Jose coming in, 22 NHL teams.
Right.
So the number of jobs nowhere near what it is today.
No, and at the time, the International League was elevated to the same status as the American League. So you had a lot of NHL affiliates now coming into the International League. Mm-hmm. A lot of independent teams like Milwaukee, I did my research and from friends that were there, spoke very highly of Phil Whitliff and the Pettits, mm-hmm. and how it was run, as a top organization and with a lot of class, and they treated the players like any NHL team.
I was just going to say, the number of people we've talked to from that era, the independent era, so to speak, it all talked about it. It's just like being in the NHL for the most part.
Well, it was. I mean, especially, obviously practicing at Wilson Park wasn't a lot of fun, but, playing games at the Bradley Center in front of, 15, 16,000 people, I mean, it wasn't odd, for a sellout game, especially once the Packers were beat out of the playoffs. Right. To have 17,500 people on a Saturday night at the Bradley Center watching us play hockey in the minors.
I can't imagine that at that time in the IHL there were many buildings that were better than that. It was probably about 4 or 5 years old when you got there. Yeah, I mean, it was as good as many of the rinks in the NHL at the time, and the amenities and the facility, were second to none, and mm-hmm. We were treated that way. We were treated like, we were in the NHL, really. And for players like myself later in our careers, that it meant a lot to be in a facility like that where hockey was a priority. You mentioned the IHL had kind of stepped up. It really became an outstanding league, and the expansion. I mean, you're talking major cities. It was NHL type cities you were going to, with San Francisco coming in, and Vegas, and San Diego, and Phoenix, and all Houston. Of that. I mean, yeah, exactly. You were going to. It was changing from the Kalamazoons and the Flints and all of that stuff, the old bus league that it was. Well,
those bus trips were still there early on, but like I mentioned, our third year there, we would the Pettits would charter. It was important for us to be rested and ready to to perform when we got to Flint or actually Fort Wayne and Kalamazoo, and they started chartering us into those cities the day of the game. Like a 3:00 charter, get to the rink by 5:00, and we were back in our own bed sleeping by midnight.
How much did you guys enjoy that? Did you guys understand that this? I mean, because there were some guys. You were in the NHL.
Right.
Some guys obviously weren't. Hadn't had that experience. Perhaps maybe they were on some other IHL city and never got it. Did they understand how awesome this was? Did you? Understand how great it was. You've been on a couple.
I know there was a lot of young players that it was kind of awe-inspiring for them to be chartered around and treated the way we were. I'd been in St. Louis for a number of years, and it was always a headache trying to fly through Chicago in inclement weather, and stuck in the airports for 4 or 5 hours. And early on in my career, I'd been on 20-hour bus rides through the Maritimes and through Eastern United States, playing in the American League. So it was not what the minors was painted to be. That's for certain.
Do you kind of look at the way you mentioned the getting stuck in Chicago? You look at these NHL guys, man. They have no idea, do they? The guys that are in the NHL
now they, obviously it's different. It's a different game. I mean, I got to Quebec and we started chartering, but I mean that's, common practice now. I don't think any of the teams fly commercial anymore. Right. It's just, the players with the schedules they have need their rest, and it's important to get the players, in a city and back home, in a reasonable amount of time without having to deal with airports and whatnot. So. Looking back at it, the kids like to hear, my two boys like to hear stories, but, it's hard for them to understand not having to bus around, because I think even there's a lot of college teams now that charter their flights everywhere. So, I guess they were ahead of the curve at the time, and now it's common practice.
Statistically, those years you were in Milwaukee, just unbelievable. I mean, you played on some great teams. You put up the big numbers in the goals department. I can't imagine, and you mentioned 16, 17,000 people coming on a Saturday night. Where else would you want to be if you're not in the NHL?
I remember our second year going into it. The first year we didn't have much luck in the shootout, and
Did you like the shootout, by the way?
I enjoyed it. I mean, that was the first league to go to a shootout, and I think my second or third year, they actually, during the lockout, I mean, our games were, some of the games were televised on ESPN2. To go into a shootout back then, especially at home, I was, typically I was always left for the fifth shooter. So if I scored and I was the last shooter, it would bring 17,000 people to their feet.
Yeah.
It was pretty exciting when you think back. I mean, it was definitely one of my fondest memories of being in, Milwaukee, and going in. I can remember one of the goals, top of the circle. I took a slap shot and scored as the fifth shooter to win the game, and the place just went absolutely crazy.
That's fantastic. At the time too, it's an independent team. You got a lot of guys that probably had some NHL experience, yourself included. That's where you want to be, I guess, those independent teams, because I don't know how your contract was, but you're kind of free to go to any of the 22 teams as opposed to just one of the teams. Right.
No, it was, I definitely did my homework before I ended up in Milwaukee, and that's where I wanted to be if I was going to be in the minors. And, players were on long-term contracts, so it wasn't typical of your minors, minor league team where there was a lot of call-ups. I mean, the guys that you started the year with typically were there at the end of the season.
Right.
So we made a lot of friends, and, I think by that time, some of us were in our 30s or well into our 30s, and we were resolved with the fact that this is where we were going to end our career, and let's make the best of it. And guys owned homes. I mean, I owned a home in Milwaukee until 2004 before I relocated down to Chicago. But it was just a great place to play hockey, great place to raise kids. I enjoyed it tremendously.
And that's the amazing thing, is so many guys, especially in those independent years, they stuck around. They ended up, they weren't from there, but they ended up coming and then staying.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think Tony Herkus still lives north of the city. Like I said, we just moved back, 7 years ago we moved away, but we had been there we owned a home there from 93 until 2004. Yeah. A little over 10 years. I made that my home. Even when I was playing in Europe, we always came back to Milwaukee, and it was just, that's where we wanted to be.
So so many guys now, they don't understand the year-round stuff. I mean, you got to hit the Summerfests, I suppose, and the state fairs if you wanted to, and all of that stuff, I guess, right?
We definitely became, part of Milwaukee, and Milwaukeeans, if you want to call it. We were there. We enjoyed, every aspect of it. I raised two boys there, and, they still have friends in Milwaukee, and we go back and visit friends often enough.
I want to talk about a couple of the guys you played with. We'll start with Tony Herkus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tony was definitely a special player. I wouldn't credit all my success to Tony, because a lot of my success I had on the ice, in scoring goals and whatnot, was in front of the net, and you just had to be a different player to be able to play that position. But definitely he made it enjoyable and a lot of fun to be with, both on and off the ice.
Dave Mackey.
Dave Mackey is still very good friends with Dave. He actually resides in the same town as I do here in northern suburbs of Chicago. But Dave was, we used to do a lot of pranks and that when we traveled, and he's still to this day the only player that sleeps with his eyes open.
You want to explain that, or you just?
No, I mean honestly,
he's always got to be ready.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, it was. It's a sight to see, that's for sure.
Mike McNeil.
Mike, I still talk to Mike, and he's down in South Bend, and with the club here, the Chicago Mission, we've got quite a lot of players that end up playing for Notre Dame, and I've kept in touch with Mike over the years, and we run camps. He runs the new facility there for the school, and we do a lot of camps and clinics down there.
You mentioned a little bit about the ownership at the time, but I mean, Mr. Pettit, NHL Hall of Famer, as an announcer for the Blackhawks. You guys, I'm assuming you all knew who this guy was, right? When you came in, you knew that he knew what he was doing a little bit. Maybe had better feel than a lot of the other owners.
He was in the locker room after games. He and Jane would come down to the locker rooms after games, and he cared about us, and it translated into flying into a city early. Just the little things that you took for granted, not having to worry about sticks or tape or anything like that. A lot of teams are on tighter budgets. And then of course you have the Bob Uecker commercials, advertising, and that was, some of the funniest times, I've ever had was, doing film shoots, and between segments or shoots, Bob Uecker, basically having the entire cafeteria in tears with all his jokes and antics, and it was a lot of fun.
That's just it. You were the captain. You were the face of this team for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, added responsibility, or is it something that it was not that big a deal to you necessarily? I mean, you understood the honor maybe, but it wasn't a chore.
It wasn't a chore. I was for the most part, while the 3 years I was there, I was the oldest player on the team, so it kind of, the father figure kind of came easy. And, you just took the young guys in and, make sure they got along and were taken care of. And, it was just, I guess I look back at it as, the part of the job that I had, and the responsibility that I had, for the way we were treated. There was a price to pay, and that was, the performance and making sure everyone, in the locker room kept up to their end of the bargain, so that we continued to have the kind of things that we enjoyed while we were there.
You mentioned getting to the net, and at that time it was a heck of a lot harder standing in front of the net than it is nowadays. Was there anybody that enjoyed a goal more than you?
No, I mean, once the goals started, I mean, I had a different role as a player in the NHL, right. More as a third or fourth line grinding forward. When I got to Milwaukee, Phil basically told me to have fun, knew what my potential was and let me do what I did. And, I started achieving success that I hadn't enjoyed in previous years in the NHL. And I enjoyed scoring goals. And, there's some players that are willing to go to those, dirty places, and I was one of them, and it didn't really bother me. At the time, I was one of the bigger players in the league, that played. I mean, I don't know if I'd be one of the bigger ones now, except for the size of my waist. But the game definitely has changed. There was, clutching and grabbing. I mean, the rules weren't what they are today. I mean, we would get away with murder back then, comparatively speaking, to the rules in place today. So, but I definitely enjoyed myself.
When you look back at your time in Milwaukee, what do you think of? What comes to mind? How do you remember it?
I remember having an unbelievable fan following, like not just for me personally as a player, but for the team and the support we got in the community. I mean, it was akin to, going to a mall and people would recognize who you were or knew who you were. The game was affordable. It was entertaining, and we played a good brand of hockey, and that's what I remember. It was not your typical, IHL team. This was a step above everywhere else. And this is where, players, once we got there, we coveted our positions, and we did everything we could to keep our positions on the team.
Speaking of great places to be, we're in a great place right now. Tell everybody what you're doing nowadays, because talk about top-notch facility. You really have one here, Gino.
We do. We're very proud. I came back. I relocated from St. Louis 2.5 years ago to help run the Chicago Mission Hockey Club. It's a youth hockey organization. We have 7 boys teams and 4 girls teams, who this year, I would say, based on rankings, we're the top club in the country, if not North America. We're slowly but surely turning it into a hockey factory, and what I mean by that is, on average, on the boys' side, we move 6 to 8 players on to college commitments from our club alone prior to them getting to junior hockey. And as far as the girls goes, since 2008, they've moved 61 girls on there to Division I or Division III schools. So, I mean, if you're fortunate enough to play on one of the girls' teams through their U19 program, you're pretty much going to one of the top schools in the country. We, as a club, own the facility. The teams and players all have their own locker rooms. We're very proud of, we're very proud of the facility. We're very proud of the club, and we work hard to maintain that top status, and which gives us the ability to draw the top kids, not only from the Midwest, but from around the country.